Today we're talking about professional presentations, and I want to do this presentation in a format that is similar to the way you will be presenting your informational interviews or other presentations in a virtual capacity. So I'll show you a little bit behind the scenes as far as how I'm presenting so you can get some tips for yourself. But we're going to cover two main topics today as we talk about presentations. We're first going to talk about the organization of a presentation and how to organize it. And then we're going to move into delivering the presentation. So the takeaway today is you will effectively know how to organize and deliver a presentation. So first step here is organizing a presentation. I will say that as somebody who gives multiple presentations a day in my role, the organization of a presentation can make or break the presentation. So there are three types of presentations. The first type is reporting. This can commonly be somebody who is reporting to their department head about progress on a project. This could be reporting to a C-level on the progress of a department, or this could simply be reporting on a topic or a theme similar to your informational interviews that you will be sharing. That also crosses over into the explaining phase. So the explaining style is that you are explaining something to your audience. So your informational interview presentation falls a little bit between the reporting and explaining categories because you're sharing your experience, but you're also educating your peers through your presentation. And then the final topic type is updating. And this is commonly sales presentations. So this is something that I'm doing multiple times a day. This could be business updates. When you are a people leader in a company, oftentimes this is personnel insights or maybe updates to the HR or people team about your employees. There's two things to think about when it comes to the timing of a presentation. The first thing you'll want to think about is the time limit you have. And the second is the time of day you're giving your presentation. So the first piece of the time limit is important to understand because if you stick to the time limit or you're under but very close, it shows that you have practiced and that you understand the material and you can stay within the guidelines that are given to you. So whether the timeline and the time limit is given to you by your professor or potentially a boss or a client or a customer in the business world, sticking to a time limit is very important. Oftentimes, I recommend that you leave time for questions at the end. That also gives you a little bit of a buffer in case anything goes sideways or you're not sure how to bounce back or fix something if you have a hiccup in your presentation. And always, like I said, practice to make sure that you are landing within the time limit expectations. If you're not sure what the presentation timing is, ask the person who's asked you to give the presentation. That will always clarify. Time of day, this is one that you may know at your core for yourself. Everyone seems to agree that after lunch is a tough time to listen to a presentation or to present something, right? Everybody has food in their bellies and they may be a little tired entering the second half of the day. I would say that is the most important time to avoid if you are giving an important presentation. Following closely after that is later in the day. That later in the day typically tends to be when people are letting work pile up and they have emails they need to get to, so their mind is thinking about something else, or maybe they have something going on after this where they need to pick up their kids from school or they need to cook dinner tonight and they're thinking about their grocery list. Later in the day just tends to come with a bit of distractions. So the ideal time to give a presentation is actually midday. And research shows that 10 a.m. is actually the ideal time to give a presentation. So if you can find a way to make your presentations around 10 a.m., that will mean you are effectively communicating with your audience. So speaking of your audience, we're going to talk a little bit about the analysis of your audience. So there are a few things to consider with your audience. The first is the demographical considerations. So this could be gender, age, political orientation. This is important for you to understand who you're speaking to because presenting to a group of 5-year-olds looks very different than a group of 20-year-olds, right? The way you will explain something or present your findings will be very different based off of the age group. It also will be very different based off of the political orientation, because presentations are not intended to be polarizing. So you want to be careful and make sure that your presentation is informative, but it's also coming from your perspective, and then you're presenting things that are easily accepted by other folks as well. Situational analysis is, where are you presenting? Who is your audience? Where are they? So maybe you're presenting in a classroom setting. So some of you have presented on campus in a classroom setting where there's 20 or so seats and everybody's sitting facing you. Sometimes you present at a table, a big boardroom table where there might be 10 seats and everyone's sitting in a circle. So you may get the side view of someone instead of somebody's direct eye contact. Sometimes you're presenting in an audience format where there's a large audience of 50, 60, 70 people. And so you have to think about how you're presenting, where your audience is sitting, so that you can effectively decide how to best engage your audience. So if you have 60, 70, 80 people in the room, asking a question may not be the most effective use of engagement with your audience. You may ask them to raise their hand if something applies to them rather than asking for their input directly. Whereas if you're sitting at a boardroom table with 10 people, asking for their input directly is probably more effective than asking them to raise their hands. They may feel a little silly sitting next to 6 people raising their hand. That brings us to psychological analysis. And this is one that is really important in the business world. And I think sometimes is effective in the education space as well. As you progress in your time here at Point Loma, you'll learn that there are certain teachers that want things to be done a certain way. There are certain classmates that have an agenda or a viewpoint on a certain topic that you may have learned from another class. So considering these important details as far as hidden agendas or biases is really important, because it will help you tailor the way you present the information to those people. So one quick story I will tell you here is that this is something that I think about when I present to my potential customers. So being in a sales position, I'm often presenting my product over a competitor. And sometimes I'll have somebody new on the presentation that has not yet spoken to me or learned about our product. And I have to take into consideration that they may have a bias towards my competitor, as that's the product that they're using, and I'm coming in trying to sell them a new product. So I have to take the lens of somebody who's happy with the product they have, and why would they want to listen to me about a new product and new features when they already have one that they like. And so this is something that I have to think about and work my mind around this as I develop my presentations in the business world every day. The last piece I want to mention here is how important reading the room is. Reading the room is very critical because you want to understand if your audience is engaged in what you're saying. Are they listening? Are they nodding their heads? Are they smiling? Are they laughing when you're utilizing humor? Are they involved in the presentation if you give them an opportunity to? This will help you get an understanding of how effective your presentation is just by reading body language and reactions from your audience. And this is how you know if you did a great analysis of the first 3 points we just discussed. Now this brings us into delivery method, and there are a few different delivery methods that you can utilize. The first being impromptu, meaning you didn't know you needed to give a presentation and now you need to stand up and you need to develop something quickly and share with your audience. Obviously, this is not recommended and this is not encouraged, but it does happen. There have been times where I've been put on the spot at my company to share something or present about something to a larger group. And oftentimes this is something that you're comfortable with from a topic perspective, but sometimes it's not. And so you need to have skills in your back pocket to be able to speak effectively and engage an audience. The second delivery method is memorizing. Now, some people may think that memorizing is what makes a great presentation, but I am here to say that memorizing is really difficult. And I don't think memorizing is all that effective sometimes, because oftentimes I think people can tell that you've written something and you've memorized it rather than reading the room, bouncing off of different people and what they're saying and how they're nodding or agreeing with you. A dynamic presentation is much better than a memorized presentation. Now, that doesn't mean you can be sloppy, but it means that memorizing can be very tricky because sometimes, and I think we all know this, if you forget one word, it can really throw you off, and then you get jumbled and you don't know where you're at, and it's hard to get back on track. The third delivery method is reading. So again, this is reading directly off the slides or reading from a paper. Reading shows your audience that you are not confident in your presentation or your topic. And one of the greatest lessons that I've learned, and I will pass on to all of you, is that slides are not meant to be read. You are to speak to the slides, not read from the slides. So the slides are there to help you with the direction that you're going in and what you're going to be saying, but you shouldn't have a bunch of words on your slide. You shouldn't have long sentences. You shouldn't be reading verbatim what's on the slide. You should be talking about the topic that is on your slide, similar to what I'm doing here in this presentation. Now, number 4 is bolded, and that is because this is the ideal delivery method. So the reason this is the ideal delivery method is because it's conversational in nature and you're presenting facts in a very informational manner. You want people to feel as though you are speaking directly to them in a presentation. You don't want them to feel that you're speaking to a larger group. If it's personal, it always lands better with your audience. So keep that in mind and think about yourself as a viewer, as an audience member. What type of presentations do you like? What do people do that keep you engaged or that makes you excited to listen to what they have to say? And try to implement some of that into your presentations and practice in this course or the rest of your courses through your time at Point Loma. But making something conversational always makes it more impactful. One piece I will mention here, as I mentioned, I'm going to give you a little behind the scenes of how this works on a computer presenting electronically, as you're going to be doing in this class, is I'm actually using Google Slides with the presenter mode. And so the benefit to this is that I have this little window over here on my second screen where I have notes for my slide here that I want to mention. And that's why I don't have to include them on my slides. So I can read this on my other screen, but instead of reading off of the slide directly, I am speaking to my speaker notes. So that's a little quick tip for you as you do your presentations in this class. You can use speaker notes to help guide you rather than reading off of the slide or reading from a script directly. Okay, so that brings us into organizing the presentation. So a great presentation has great structure. It always starts with an opening. Typically, this is something catchy, whether it is something that you are bringing to the group as far as a story or a great visual aid, or it is a question, sometimes a quote. All of these things are meant to be thought-provoking and grab your audience's attention from the beginning. Now, I will say, as you become an effective speaker, oftentimes you can use your own vocal inflections, energy levels, your own confidence to help you open strong rather than using a quote or a creative thought. You can start to be the excitement in the opening for your audience. Oftentimes, your opening will also include an agenda slide. So giving your audience an idea of what you're going to cover is very important because it helps them track with what you're saying in your presentation. So you'll notice in the beginning of this presentation, I said we were going to cover 2 topics, and that gave you all a very clear path of where we're going with this and what you're going to be able to take away from the presentation. I always recommend mentioning what your audience will be able to take away in that first agenda slide. The next piece is your body, and there are a few different ways to structure the body of your presentation. You can structure things chronologically, so this is in order of events if you're reporting on something. You can structure something in a direct manner, and that means you are starting with your finding or your conclusion, and then you are supporting it through the rest of the presentation. Or the opposite, which is the indirect way, and that is starting with your explanation and ending with your finding. So leading your audience to your solution or your finding at the end of the presentation. One tip here is that as you're going from slide to slide, use transitions so that it's not an awkward jump to a different topic. I will tell you, all great speakers that I've known or listened to or practiced with or tried to emulate have a strength for utilizing silence. They will utilize pauses and they will utilize silence to help them gather their thoughts. And we'll get to this in a later slide where we talk about filler words and what happens when you're nervous. But using transitions can help you eliminate your nerves a little bit and lean into silence with these transitions because it's okay to take a break. I've been talking for a very long time here on this presentation, almost 15 minutes. And so a break between slides is helpful for me to gather my thoughts on what I'm going to be saying next. So it's okay to take a pause. Don't make it too long, but a pause in between slides. And then finally, you'll want to have a strong conclusion. Typically, this conclusion is ending with a slide that opens it up for questions or potentially a discussion about your topic. Or in some cases, it's a slide to select next steps. So another example for me in the business world is that as I give presentations daily in my current role as a sales rep, I am always ending my presentations with how we are going to set next steps. So once I've spoken with somebody about my product, do they want to see a demonstration? And I will have a slide that prompts them to see a demonstration and we'll book right there on the call. Or once they've seen a demonstration, what next steps make sense on their end? How can we move forward to working towards a partnership together? So it depends the type of presentation that you're giving, but always end with some sort of conversational piece with your audience. I think that really helps. Now, the caveat is in a remote capacity when you're giving presentations such as your informational interview presentation, there's not a lot of room for collaboration at the end of a presentation. So it's okay to just wrap it up and say if you have questions or comments, you feel free to reach out to me, which you'll see I also do at the end of this presentation. Okay, now we move into establishing credibility. And I think this is probably one of the most important slides because this is what a presentation really needs to go from good to great. I think good presenters can have a good structure, can speak well, but I think people who are great presenters do a really good job of establishing credibility. So there's lots of ways to do this. First and foremost being your appearance. I always recommend that you dress beyond the presentation you're giving. And so one of the biggest golden nuggets I've been given in my career was from one of my leadership coaches actually back in high school. And she said, as a speaker, as a presenter, you are always setting the tone for the energy and the style that you want in the room. So I take that as far as energy and bring a higher level of energy to my presentations than I want my audience to return to me. But this also goes for appearance. And so if you are giving a formal presentation, err on the side of professional and almost overdressed before underdressed. So it's always better to be overdressed. Men, sometimes that means suits. It could mean a collared shirt. Women, it means a good neckline, pretty high for you with a collar, a quality material. Sometimes just a blouse material is better than a t-shirt material or a sweatshirt material. Make sure your hair is clean, brushed, presentable. All of that helps establish credibility for you. In your presentation, such as your informational interview presentations you're going to be doing, I ask that you dress professionally, but since it's all remote and online, professional is a little different than professional in person. So gentlemen, if you're wearing a collared shirt, that works for me. And again, women, if you are wearing a nice blouse with a collar or a more formal looking top, that's great too. Second way to establish credibility is to cite your sources. So if you are presenting on findings or you are presenting on a project or something that a group has done, relay where you got your information from. That will help the audience, if they're questioning you, understand that you really did your homework and you understood the facts and the background of what you're presenting on. And again, this helps you establish credibility because it proves that you've put in the work to make sure that your presentation is accurate, up to date, and you're utilizing quality sources. Similarly, you always have the option to cite your background. So when you start a presentation, as we just talked about on the previous slide, when you do your opening and you talk about your agenda, there's always an opportunity for you to introduce yourself. Now, I will say there is a caveat here, and that is you need to know in which capacity you want to present yourself or introduce yourself. So if you're presenting to coworkers or people who you work with often or your classmates who you see all the time, you may not need to do a formal introduction of who you are. But if you are presenting to somebody new, it always helps to share who you are and why you're presenting this topic. So again, an example of me in my day-to-day, Every time that I open up a presentation to give with a client, I always share that I'm an account executive and I will be their point of contact moving forward, why I came to the company, what's brought me to this role. And that helps them understand that I have context and I understand the space that they're in and I understand sales. And so citing your background can help really give you a level of credibility where people will say, they're very experienced or they understand this topic. And so I want to listen to them more than I would want to listen to somebody that I don't know why this is important to them. Moving on to making eye contact. This is always important, whether you're interviewing, you're presenting, you are networking. Eye contact instantly equals confidence and credibility. So as you're presenting, make sure you're looking at your audience. You're not looking off to the side. You're not looking up in the air, and you're not questioning what you're saying. Speak with confidence. Your posture is important. I always recommend standing. I'm standing as I'm giving this presentation now. I truly believe standing gives you a level of power and confidence that sitting does not. So if you are a nervous speaker, I always recommend trying to stand. And then again, I will say it again, speak to the slides. Do not read off of them. This instantly gives you credibility because it says that you know what you're talking about and you know what you're presenting. All right, we're going to move into developing visual aids. So what are visual aids and how do they help? Well, there are a few you can utilize. The first being a PowerPoint presentation. So we all know PowerPoints can be great or they can be kind of boring and bland. And it's really up to you as far as how you want to utilize PowerPoint to your advantage. I personally feel that a cohesive theme with enticing colors and a good design always helps support your point because it's exciting for somebody to look at, and the visual aids will always give something more to the slide than just a white background with black writing. So I encourage you to use a theme or a font or a color that's exciting to you. Obviously, keep it professional. If I was presenting in the business setting, I would not use this background and this font. I might use these visual aids, but the colors are a little cartoony, I would say, versus a professional presentation. I may use darker greens, darker blues, maybe even darker reds so that it's a little bit more professional. Font size is very important. The very smallest I would go is 16. And again, the largest I would go is 40. You can see the font sizes here. Again, online presentations are a little different than in-person presentations because everyone is looking at their screen. So it's a little bit easier to read. But in a classroom setting, you always want to err on a larger font size so people who are sitting in the back or even an audience style, auditorium style, the people in the back can read what your slides say. Always utilize an outline format. That means not having too many words on your slide, not using full sentences on your bullets, keeping it short, concise, to the point. And one of the ongoing discussions in the world of PowerPoint is whether to use animation or not. If you should show all of your points the way I've been doing in this presentation, or if you should have them roll in on clicks. I'll show you a little bit behind the scenes when we get off of this slide. My recommendation is do what is easiest for you. I get distracted when animation is coming in as a presenter. I don't mind it as a viewer as long as it's kind of easy transitions rather than those big animations where the text is rolling in and it's really robust. Keep it simple, but if it's distracting to you as the presenter, you don't need to do it. If it's helpful for you as the presenter, that's great. You can click and have your next point come on. Industry standard says that if you're clicking to put your next point on, it doesn't allow your it doesn't allow your viewer to read ahead. And that's kind of the detriment of putting all your points on a slide. I feel if your points are very limited like this, that they still need to listen to your explanation to get the content of your presentation. So it's okay if they read ahead a little bit, but if you have a lot of words on a slide or you have a lot of data on a slide, animation can really help. I mentioned this at the beginning of the slide, but slide design being clear and catchy and consistent. You want to make sure your slides are consistent. That is the biggest mistake I see for my students is that they do not keep consistency in their font size, and their coloring in their PowerPoint. So make sure it is consistent. And then finally, supporting graphics. I love a supporting graphic. I think it makes your PowerPoint look much more professional. I think it helps you look a little bit more creative. And I think it helps your viewer kind of see the whole picture and not be instantly let down that there's a bunch of words on a slide with no picture. I think having less words, more pictures also helps make people think that this is going to be a more engaging presentation than maybe what they've seen in the past. So let me show you one more hot tip, and that's how to add animation to your slides. So as I mentioned, I am going to be showing you how this works on a computer presentation. And what I want to show you is what it would look like if I have these points coming in on a click. So what I'll do is I'll highlight the text that I want, and I'll go up here to animate. Now it's going to automatically put it in as appearing on the click. And so what you'll see here, once I exit out of this, is there's a few little circles over here that shows me that there's animation. And then when I go to do the slideshow, you'll notice that I click once and all of my font comes in. All my points come in. So again, this is the difference. I would be moving through my PowerPoint here, my title would show up, and then my points would come in, versus this next slide that I'm gonna get to, which is talking about videos where all the text is on there. So that's your option, animation or having it all presented there for you at the beginning. Okay, so let's move into videos. Videos should be short and to the point. They should ensure that it is supporting the main point of your presentation. So don't make a crazy video work into your presentation. Use a video that really ties into the topic and supports what you're saying. Make sure you practice when you are using videos. Embedding a video is much, much easier and much more seamless into your presentation rather than clicking to a link to a web browser that will kind of take everybody all over the place when they're viewing your presentation. So keep it simple, make sure you practice, make sure you know that the video will work. Excellent. Now we're going to move into delivering a presentation. This is my favorite part of the conversation today, and we're going to start with talking about stage fright. So many people experience stage fright, and so it's important to start by defining stage fright. Stage fright is normal anxiety that occurs before a presentation, and typically it dissipates as the presentation progresses. I myself still experience stage fright. I think it's very common for people who even have years of experience or a high confidence in their presentation skills. This is very normal, and most all of us will experience this. And this is something that you can find tactics to help you progress and get better with your stage fright. So, common nervous habits that you will experience if you are experiencing stage fright can be one of these 4 things. The first being verbal clutter. So this is where folks will utilize like, even phrases like you know, or as I said. Filler phrases is what we call them. Instead, as I mentioned earlier, utilize silence and utilize a pause. If you're not sure where you're going next, it's better to pause and regroup your thoughts than to say, the next point is, even dragging out your words makes it distracting. So just try to take a break, pause, regroup, and start fresh. Next thing to consider is rocking back and forth. This is very common in person. I even catch myself doing this sometimes if I'm standing for a presentation on my computer electronically. I'm even catching myself do it a little bit right now. I think it's a way of anxiety and stress kind of working through your body. And so make sure that you have a good bend in your knees and you move a little bit. Movement can help with avoiding rocking back and forth. You can also experience an increase in your rate of speech. So you'll notice that if you practice your presentation a lot, you may speak much slower. And then when you get in front of an audience, you start talking faster and you're not sure where you're going and you're a little nervous. Take a deep breath and remember, it's okay. Common rate of speech and a slower pace is good, but you don't want to be too slow. You want to bring energy to your presentations because that's what will keep your audience engaged. You also could experience physical symptoms. So some people experience sweating or heart pounding or shaking. These are all very, very common things with stage fright. So now that we've identified it and we know what it looks like and how it can show up for us in presentations, how do we alleviate it? Number one way to alleviate stage fright is practice. Practice, practice, practice. Pick a topic that you're interested in. We know oftentimes that may not be within something and within your control, but if you're presenting on something that you are confident in or you're interested in, it always helps with stage fright. The third tip is to accept your worst fear. Plan for it. If your worst fear is you're going to forget what you're going to say, think about that and see if there's a way to combat maybe forgetting what you're going to say. Can you write some notes for yourself on a piece of paper? Can you use those speaker notes I showed you earlier here? How can you prepare for your worst fear if that does come true? Take deep breaths. Breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. I had a friend who always took 3 deep breaths before she would get up and take any presentation. That is a great tactic to calm yourself down, lower your heart rate, get your speed to a place where people can actually listen and engage with what you're saying. Deep breaths are super important and always helpful. I also find that utilizing humor can always help. So if you feel like you can mix in a joke or something that's a little more comical, obviously remember, be professional. These are professional presentations, but humor is now widely accepted in the business world and can always help if you're nervous or if you forget what you're going to say. I see humor being utilized very well. The last thing I'll say here is that you can look up strategies for your specific symptoms. So, for example, one of the things I noticed was that before a presentation, which is when we see stage fright being the highest, we always get nervous before our name gets called for our presentation. And then when we get up to the front of the classroom or the front of the audience, we are a little nervous, and then it starts to fade away as it gets into the presentation. I noticed this about myself in college. And one of my friends, who actually was a theater major, told me that a lot of times this stage fright that you'll get before a presentation is just excess energy. And sometimes it's helpful to jump up and down a few times or bounce around to get some of this energy out. And I've noticed that helps me. If I'm nervous about something, I'll jump up and down a few times, I'll take a couple deep breaths, and I'll tell myself, I've got this. I'm confident, I practiced, I know what I'm talking about, and that always helps. So make sure that you talk to yourself a little bit and remind yourself that you've got this. All right. Aspects of delivery. So always remember, we talk about this a lot. Eye contact is important. Movement. If you have gestures or if you want to move from one side of the stage to the other, that can always help land a point better in a presentation. Vocal variation is very important. This is something PitchVantage will help you with. This is something that will keep your audience engaged. You don't want to be monotone. We've all listened to people who've been monotone in a presentation and hoped for it to be over before. Mix up the rate of your speech, the volume of your speech, and the variation of your tone of voice, and that will help keep your audience engaged. Again, as we talked about before, your appearance will help you. So stand confident and keep your shoulders back, and you will seem like you've got this and like you're ready to present to everybody else. And again, practice. This will help you with your confidence and help everybody understand key points, keep things concise, and keep you on track with your presentation. That concludes our presentation today. And if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me a message or put a comment below. Presentations are extremely critical in the business world. I don't know one department that does not do presentations. So getting really comfortable with PowerPoint, Google Slides, PowerPoint, and giving a presentation is not only critical to your education and your time here at Point Loma, but also to your career. So would love to help you if you have questions. I'm excited to watch your informational interviews and those presentations.